We are joined by the Director of Health Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, Naomi Lopez Bowman, as we get set to talk about the ins and outs of King v. Burwell in front of the Supreme Court today. Naomi, good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate your time this morning. I tried to give a preview, a foreshadowing of this yesterday, and I am in no way qualified to break down the legalese and the legal aspects of what is about to be undertaken at the Supreme Court. Essentially, what's going on is the case is King v. Burwell, and the suit is to challenge federal subsidies for health insurance plans in states where the states didn't set up their exchange, but the feds went in and gave people subsidies anyway. Is that essentially what we're arguing about?
That you really nailed it. That is what the challenge is about. And actually, just so your listeners know, the oral arguments in the Supreme Court case are going on right now.
Mm-hmm. What can we expect in this process? First, let's lay it out. What's the timetable? Are we going oral arguments today for the next couple of days? Is there going to be then a wait period, or is this going to be done over the direct course of the next few days to weeks?
Well, so the oral arguments are taking place today, and they will probably be wrapped up today. And then we should expect a decision from the Supreme Court on this case at the end of June. Now, the Supreme Court usually issues their rulings in very high-profile cases at the end of their session in late June, but they could also surprise to the early side. It's anyone's guess. But really, the real fundamental issue that's being debated, now, obviously this case is going to have very important implications on health insurance subsidies around the country, but the real issue at stake is what does the law actually say, and did the Obama administration illegally and unilaterally implement what they wanted the law to say as opposed to what the text of the law says? That's what's going to be argued. Are they implementing what they wish would have been passed by Congress, or what actually was passed by Congress?
Naomi Lopez Bowman from the Illinois Policy Institute, our guest this morning on the morning meeting. Naomi, there are states that set up their own exchanges. There are states that opted out, but there were states that tried to and were so terrible at putting the exchanges together, they kind of just gave up on it. Is that going to come into play here too?
That probably won't come into play very much. That may come into play further down the road as Congress looks at ways to hold individuals who took subsidies harmless and look for alternatives to actually delivering on the promises of Obamacare that have never transpired, things like affordable and accessible health insurance. What has happened is that you had about 14 states set up their own state-based exchanges. Most of them have been colossal failures. For example, in Oregon, they spent more than $300 million setting up a state-based exchange. They did not enroll a single person, not one, over the Internet. You've also had other colossal failures, for example, in Massachusetts, and then the cases where it's actually gone better, you're still looking at situations where they have spent enormous sums of money for every enrollee, and the taxpayers in those states, the federal government did pay for establishing the exchange, but down the road, those taxpayers in those states will be responsible for the personnel costs of running their exchange. They'll be responsible for all the IT costs, any IT upgrades, the pensions, and the health insurance coverage benefits for those employees. So they're basically looking at very long-term expenses down the road, and that's one of the issues that I think state lawmakers need to be thinking about. If the Supreme Court rules that these subsidies were illegally implemented, then they will go away. And so there will be an enormous amount of pressure for lawmakers in states to immediately pass a state-based exchange so that their taxpayers, so that their citizens can have access to these subsidies. But there are two things to keep in mind. One is that passing a state-based exchange will not only incur very long-term and very high costs for the citizens of those states, but it will also slam the door shut for any new opportunities for healthcare reform. And that's really the silver lining in this challenge. I know there's a lot of fear, a lot of people don't know what's going to happen, but if the Supreme Court does rule that these were illegally implemented, there is going to be an enormous opportunity for lawmakers in the states to have a wider array of options to deliver access and affordability to their citizens. There will be, I believe that there will be a congressional fix to what has transpired and all of the shortcomings that we've seen from this law.
She is the Director of Health Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest this morning on the morning meeting. Naomi, I want to talk about two direct cases that were handled a bit differently here in our coverage area. Illinois, when they got the opportunity as a state, really just ran with their arms open towards this federal exchange, trying to watch all the federal money they could pour into the state. They had to then, under Governor Quinn, this idea that they would be at the front of the line. And conversely, just to the west, Missouri has taken a much more taciturn kind of wait and see. We're not really sure if we want this approach. These two states are in a little bit different situations as this goes before the Supreme Court, yes?
Oh, absolutely. Now, in Illinois, lawmakers in Illinois is not unique. A lot of lawmakers are kind of like raccoons. They see something shiny and they're attracted to it. And in the same way, the federal government was trying to lure states into establishing a state-based exchange by offering them an enormous amount of money to establish the exchange. But that was really lawmakers that jumped at that opportunity were really very short-sighted. And Illinois lawmakers should be commended for not jumping at the money and for taking a more cautious approach, and an approach that has that is really, I think, going to provide citizens of Illinois much better prospects for accessible and affordable health insurance. For example, most people don't realize just how much actual premiums have gone up. If you're getting a subsidy, you may not realize that a lot of 27-year-olds are facing premium increases of more than 100%. People who are aged 50, the average increase in premium is over 40%. And so the idea that this law was supposed to reduce the average premium for the average family by $2,500 has never happened. That has not transpired, and this law does nothing to address the actual cost of health care, and it certainly hasn't made health insurance more affordable for most people.
If you just take a look at Economics 101, you know that anytime anything is subsidized, the cost on it invariably rises. And how you thought this was, or how I should say how the administration thought, because Naomi, I know you didn't think this, how they thought a subsidy here would make those prices go down is still one of the head scratchers for those of us watching this unfold. Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest this morning on the morning meeting. Let's talk some numbers right now, Naomi. The number of people who are now insured under Obamacare, the way it's being interpreted, versus those who had insurance before this domestic legislation was put into place, rewiring 1/6 of our economy, is, depending on reports that you read, only about 6 to 7% more. And of those people, if Obamacare went away, reports say 90% of them would still be covered because they're on Medicaid. So we're really arguing about a tiny fraction of the population here, and yet we're impacting about 93% of the country with the fees, with the structure, with the price rate increases.
There is no question that people need accessible and affordable health insurance, but the way the Affordable Care Act was trying to accomplish this was basically by causing enormous havoc and disarray for people who already had insurance and may have liked their insurance policies and may have liked their doctors and maybe didn't want to pay more for a more lavish health insurance plan. And so that was the big trade-off. Whenever we take a look at how many people signed up for, are now enrolled in Medicaid, this is not really a big surprise. The Congressional Budget Office was predicting that the vast majority of newly insured would be actually covered by Medicaid and not a private health insurance plan. In addition, whenever you offer people free health care up to 138% of poverty, a lot of people will drop their health insurance coverage. A lot of employers will realize, oh, the vast majority of my employees, particularly in low-wage jobs, would qualify for Medicaid, so I'm not going to provide a plan. And then you also have the situation where employers are actually penalized more when they offer coverage that's not affordable to their employees. I mean, they're better off, basically, employers are better off not offering any coverage at all. And so the incentives here are really not aligned with the goals of accessible and affordable health insurance. The bottom line is that this law has not delivered on the promises that were made numerous times to the American people. lawmakers did not know what they were passing because they didn't read it when they passed it in the dark of night very quickly. And there have been a lot of people harmed by this law. And so you're basically providing some very much needed insurance for some people, but it's been at the expense of others. And that's just not an approach we have to take. There is not a single solution to accessible and affordable health insurance. In fact, I would argue that there's not even a silver bullet. But the bottom line is that the idea that these subsidies going away is going to be is calamity is completely false. This law has been calamitous, and there are better approaches and better solutions to meet the health care needs of Illinoisans and Americans in general.
Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest this morning on the morning meeting. All right, so let's get out the crystal ball. Say in June we find out that the Supremes say that this is unworkable with these 30 states, and it all starts to fall apart. What does the future look like in the near future for insurance for people in the United States? Or say John Roberts gets his pen out and ickety-ackety-oop, there's a broad brush, and we're all in now. What does the future for health insurance look like then?
Well, right now you have more than a dozen really strong proposals that would allow states to regain control of their health insurance markets, because that was basically taken away by the federal government. I think there's a growing realization on both sides of the aisle that this law is not meeting the goals that were laid out and all of the promises that were made. And so I really do think that you will start to see a lot of changes to the law if it is not struck down by the Supreme Court, or you will, in the most hopeful scenario, you would see Congress pass laws that would give the power back to the states, because we can do better. We better know how to meet the needs of our citizens, and by having control of our insurance markets, we would have a lot more ability to have a competitive, robust market where affordable health insurance policies were sold, and we would have more control over who would get subsidized and who wouldn't.
I'm going to be a little bit facetious here, Naomi, but I think what I hear you saying is the federal government needs to release its annexed control of 1/6 of the economy back to the private market.
We've seen the result of the federal government trying to control 1/6 of the economy, and more importantly, make decisions about what American families should have in terms of dictating to them what kind of coverage they should have. I think American families know better than the federal government as to what their needs and preferences are. And I think that by basically exposing the fact that Washington tends to pass one-size-fits-all dictates to the states, that is not effective. That is not working, and we can do it better.
Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest this morning on the morning meeting. Naomi, a couple of times I've heard you reference states and state choice. If this law is gutted, would the states be in a position to kind of take this up on an individual basis? We know the Jeffersonian model of states as laboratories of democracy, but would each state kind of be free to then do their own thing? And would most states have the will to undertake this without being forced by the federal rod and lash?
Well, I think that there's a growing realization among congressional lawmakers that that they do want to provide more flexibility and more freedom to the states on this issue. I think that there's also a realization that you will have some states that maybe don't do it in a way that promotes accessible and affordable health insurance, but the vast majority probably will. And I think that and just as a matter of principle, that's the way it should be anyway. But it's not we're not going to have a perfect healthcare system, but it's going to be much better whenever you have more flexibility, you have states learning from each other, you have some choice for individuals to be able to have more control over the kinds of policies that best meet their needs and preferences. One size doesn't fit all, and certainly Washington, I think, is becoming more fully aware of that. And I am very optimistic that they will be crafting solutions with that in mind.
King versus Burwell going before the Supreme Court today. Opening arguments are underway. Naomi Lopez Bowman, director of the health policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, our guest this morning. Just a couple of quick things before I let you go, if you've got a moment, because this is a fascinating topic. People believe, or want to believe, I think, that when something goes to the Supreme Court, that we're thinking about very high-minded ideals. There's a philosophical reason behind all of these things that arise before the highest court in the land, but that's not necessarily the case with this challenge to Obamacare. Essentially, this is about the inner workings, the minutia of how money is moved through the IRS. Essentially, the case is challenging the IRS's ability to charge penalties to people in states who don't purchase qualifying health plans. And the way the tapestry would kind of start to unweave is if the IRS can't enforce a penalty, then the money can't come in that's needed to fund this, because this is being paid for top down, not bottom up. This is the haves paying for the have-nots under the Obamacare plan. So really this comes down to, can the IRS collect those penalties? Because if there's no money, then there can't be any coverage.
Well, certainly, if the Supreme Court rules that IRS subsidies cannot flow into states that have not established a state-based exchange, the penalties that they would impose on individuals for not having affordable and qualified health insurance would go away, and the penalties that they would impose on employers for not providing affordable and qualified health plans would also go away. But more importantly, what this case is about is whether or not an administration, whether it be Clinton or Bush or Obama or the next president's administration, can unilaterally implement something different than what Congress passed.
That is a great topic, and one that Quaid and I are actually going to come back to on the second half of the show today. Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest. Naomi, any indication, I know you're not a professional Supreme Court watcher, but is there any indication that specific justices are going to sort of lean into this law, Obamacare, and be willing to kind of gut it after they did the vigorous dancing that they've done when it's come before them previously, to let this stand?
I think it's going to come down to whether or not this is ruled as an executive overreach case. Are they going to look at the plain text of the law and make a decision on whether or not an administration implemented something other than what Congress passed?
Naomi Lopez Bowman, our guest this morning on the morning meeting, Director of Health Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Naomi, it's been fascinating having you on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Where we go, others will follow.
That's who we are.
Even if it's not the best idea. The morning meeting on Talk Radio 930 WTAD.